As we're all talking about the relationship that we have with the Brighton Dome, do we have any Brighton people actually in the room here today? Loads of Brighton people. So you will know that for a Brighton person, being on stage at the Dome is like the dream, right? So this is, for me, this is a very big moment. So I'm going to invite you, just to begin with, to reflect on something. We're going to take a moment, and I just want you to sit and reflect on how you feel about the future of UX right now. I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up and share or talk to the person next to you. I just want you to kind of sit with that thought. So some of you might be feeling very optimistic or upbeat about how it's going to turn out. Some of you might be feeling nervous or a bit deflated or angry even about how things are at the moment. And I imagine that many of you have mixed feelings or feelings that change quite often about where we are right now. And the thing is, it's a bit of a silly question in a sense. That as we've heard already, we're very bad at making predictions about the future. It's kind of the wrong question. All of those things that you might be feeling, they're all possible directions that our field is going in. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, what do we want to happen? And in my experience, that's a hard question. It's harder than it sounds. What do we want to happen? What kind of future are we going to try and create, whether or not we succeed? So that's what this next 20-something minutes are all about. Because, as I think probably every speaker today is going to say to you, we are living in a really weird moment where the path forward is not clear. We're in this kind of time of crisis, and I guess by extension, if we look at the world around us as well, there's a little bit of a kind of crisis vibe in the world as well. It's a time when really exciting things are true, the coin lands one way down, and it's also a time when very bad, upsetting things are true, and the coin lands the other way. It's a time when our practices that have been with us for decades at this point are suddenly getting upended, and the new practices are still being created, they're still being born. And we're a bit lost. It's understandable. So it's really right that we're feeling optimistic and pessimistic and wary and excited and all the rest of it. It's really natural. So the framing that I have for you today is around the idea of hopeful futures. It's a model, as Danny said, that really I've been focusing on as somebody with a research background who's thinking about what the future of research looks like. But I hope that it's a way of thinking about where we are going or where one is going that is relevant to everyone here. And I want to kind of introduce this concept, first of all, by thinking of something which is kind of the opposite. So it's the concept of doom. Does anyone here know the phrase doom scrolling? Have you come across this concept? What's doom scrolling? Does anyone want to shout out what that is? I saw you not in the front row, so will you will you tell us what doom scrolling is?
Instagram, YouTube Shorts.
Yeah. Going through like this, and several hours later, you're like, does it feel productive? No, really not. It's not productive at all. Doom is not productive, right? You just sit there feeling miserable. So the opposite of doom, I would contend, is hope. Not optimism, but hope. And I want to make that distinction because I think that the difference is really not about outcomes. It's about the way in which we engage with the world around us. Doom is a fundamentally passive way of engaging with the world. We just kind of absorb badness by doom scrolling or kind of seeing the world in this way. And hope is the opposite of that. It's active. It's about reclaiming our agency in a moment of uncertainty. And really what both of these things are speaking to is our relationship with change. And this, again, is a word that I think you've heard a lot today already. Our relationship with change is the one thing that we can control in a moment of change. Is change happening to us? Is it something that lands on us? Is it doom? Is it passivity in that moment? Or are we going to try and retain a sense of agency? Even when we can't control the outcomes, we can control how we kind of engage and act in those moments. So it's not optimism, right? None of us know what the future's like. We can't predict it. We're really bad at understanding what's going to happen. But the difference is in how we approach the situation. So the backstory to all of this is that until a couple of years ago, I worked at Google. I was UX research lead for one half of YouTube. And since I left, I've been reflecting a lot on the changes that have been happening in our field. And I've spent that time, as Danny said, trying to just like absorb everything that's coming out. So absorbing the reports that are being published, not just in UX research, but UX in the world of work more broadly, in the way that AI is being applied. So I'll share the source document, but essentially there's like 50-something reports in there that I've read. And I've been speaking to dozens and dozens of practitioners and thought leaders in this space, just to try and figure out how we can navigate this moment and kind of where we might be going. If you want to kind of engage with the long form version of this talk, it's called Hopeful Futures for UX Research. It's on UX Mag, but that's like the kind of the long read version of this. I also just want to give some credit as well, because this isn't something I've been doing alone. A lot of people have been involved in this. And in particular, I want to shout out Steph Troth, who gave an amazing talk earlier this year about hope. Katie Zanidou, who is my thought partner in this, and also Kate Halsey and Jake Burkhart, who have been great supporters of this project. If you want to read anything about, I think, the emerging practice in this space, their two recent books are probably the place that I would steer you to first as like solid practice advice. But coming back to the idea of change, the reason we're having this conversation today is that after a long time, where everything was kind of stable, we're in this moment of change. And it feels really uncertain. I'm sure a lot of us, this is the first time that we've seen it. I'm old now. I remember the late 90s. I remember the impact of the internet on our work. I remember when surveys were still done by people knocking door to door, and there was a job in agencies of acetate writer for presentations and stuff like this. But our field has been stable for a really long time, and now it isn't. And so the model of change that I want to share with you goes something like this. And as I say, I've thought about this from a UX research lens, but I think you can apply it in design or product teams as a whole, or in fact, in the world around you as well. There's 4 parts to it. The first one is to be really realistic about where you are now. The second part is to take stock of strengths and opportunities, of the assets that you already have. The third part is the kind of speculative design part. It's to imagine hopeful futures. Like what would be possible? What would be desirable? What do we want to happen? And then the final part, and I think in a way this is our moral responsibility as designers and researchers in any sense, is to set concrete steps that get you towards that hopeful future. So a 4-part process. I'll start at the beginning of that. And this part is the bit with the trigger warning. So this is the bit I think that does drag us into kind of doomy territory. And that's why it's important not to end here. But I just want to acknowledge that when we're talking about where we are now, for those of you in the room who perhaps have been laid off or are worried about being laid off or are just feeling the stress of being in an environment where these topics are coming up all the time, it can feel a bit tone deaf to talk about structural causes. I'm going to go there with the structural causes, but I just want to acknowledge that there's a kind of human experience side to this as well, that this isn't going to speak to. But your experience, is just as valid as everything I've got to say here. So that said, let's dive in. This is the chart, I think, that ties everything together for me. So on a vibes level, we've probably all felt something like this. This is the best data that I can find in all of those 50+ reports that says what's going on right now. A couple of researchers' caveats. The first is that this is all of the tech industry. It's not just UX or UX research. The second is that it comes from the US. But I think on a kind of a directional basis, we're seeing something similar. It's certainly in all the places that I've been speaking to people in recently. So the story goes something like this, right? Things are growing steadily through the 2010s. We feel like we're on a maturity journey, and we get together at events like this, and every year it feels like we've just made a step forward in some way. And there are more of us, and things are kind of, progress is happening. And then COVID hits and there's a kind of dip. But then hiring goes absolutely haywire. And there's a more than doubling in hiring. In fact, for UX research, it was even more than that. The peak was even steeper. But then just as suddenly, things drop off and they keep dropping off. And we're now in this kind of new normal, which is about 60% of where we were back before COVID. So, you have to ask yourself what happened here. And I'm sure that, there's probably many thoughts in the room about why we've ended up where we are. Again, it's multi-causal. There are many things going on here, but I think you can make a compelling case that actually this is all about economics. So the US interest rate, which I've just overlaid on the chart here, is a clue. During COVID, there was a huge injection of money into the world economy just to kind of keep the whole thing afloat, which then caused inflation, which then meant that central banks panicked and raised interest rates, which then made it expensive for companies to hire people as a means to achieve growth. So essentially, you got to a point where hiring people to achieve growth was no longer the smart economic thing to do. And I think that's where we are still today, in a sense. And it's really important to make that point, because when we're feeling a crisis in our own lives, we can look for the causes around us. Was it me? Was I bad at my job? Did I get laid off because my boss didn't like me, or my team didn't have my back, or they didn't understand UX, or whatever it might be? The causes are often very distant and not particularly sexy, but at the same time, I think we need to, kind of be clear-eyed about what's making this moment what it is. So the second causal factor that I want to talk about is democratisation. It's this idea that we're all becoming generalists over time. In research, we've been talking about this for a long time. I think GDS originally started talking about research as a team sport, 2012-ish, maybe. So this has been with us for quite a long time, but this has accelerated in recent times. So in the 4 years at the beginning of this decade, the ratio of researchers to other people who did research went from roughly 1-to-1 to 4-to-1. That is a massive change in the work that researchers do. You're facilitating other people to do research as much as you're doing research yourself. It's not just researchers, by the way. So Figma released some really interesting data recently showing that 2/3 of Figma users do not identify as designers. And I find that really interesting because what that says to me is that we're seeing a kind of a democratization that's happening everywhere. If we're doing vibe coding, that's the democratization of software engineering. It's happening to all of us. And so the next generation of tools are being built for non-researchers to do research, and non-designers to do design, and non-software engineers to do software engineers. But there is a trap that is hidden in here, which is that some of these roles are becoming more generalist than others. So again, some really interesting Figma data recently about the number of kind of sub-competencies that each of these roles contains now. Product managers have, I think, on average 5 sub-competencies. Researchers have 2. So in other words, researchers are becoming less generalist than product managers are. And that is a strategic trap for all of us. If we over-identify with our job title, if we over-identify with the role that exists today, we may find ourselves in a situation where we're not adapting and growing to this new world that we're getting into. So then the final thing that I just want to mention as a cause is the kind of what's been, I think, referred to as a kind of productivity. Was it a shock, Alexi? Yeah, it's productivity shock. So I've called it a productivity revolution. And I've framed it in that terms because I'm putting on the hat of a tech leader at this point. There's a theory of productivity that I think is current right now that explains a lot of why when interest rates drop again, we're not going to go back to hiring more headcount as being the solution. So here's how that theory goes. I'm not saying I buy this theory, I'm just saying that this is how it goes. So in 2020, if you wanted more research output, and let's say that research output crudely is like 3 studies a quarter, just go with me on this, right? What would you do? So you'd hire an additional researcher and get 6 studies per quarter. That's how you increase research productivity. In 2025, that looks different, right? So you would have 1 researcher doing 3 studies per quarter. But now look, you can have research ops, it's a productivity multiplier, and AI tools, it's a productivity multiplier. And those 4 people who do user research that aren't researchers, again, a productivity multiplier. That gets you pretty much to your 6 studies per quarter, and you don't have to hire anyone extra. So, you can quibble with the numbers, you can quibble with the quality of the outputs from this, but fundamentally, I think this belief that is kind of present in tech leadership explains why hiring is where it is today as well. And the pendulum will swing back a bit, I'm sure of it, just as it did at Klarna. But not totally, because some of these gains are genuine. And in the case of AI, I think they will become more genuine as time goes on. This model is here to stay. Okay, that was the heavy bit. So now we're going to get into something more upbeat. Let's be more positive and take stock of our strengths and opportunities. This is from a very chunky report from the World Economic Forum called The Future of Work. They do it every year. This is 2024. What this is telling you is which skills are valued by employers and which skills would be more valued by employers in the year 2030. The things that I've circled in purple on here are, I think, pretty much a description of people who do UX research. Not the job description, not the job title, the people who do UX research, you in the room here. And I've circled them because this is fundamental, right? If you let go of your job title a little bit, there is every reason to be hopeful about the future, that your skills and your traits and who you are as a person, the way that you problem solve in the world can allow you to, to kind of have a role in that future. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, look, I mean, things haven't been perfect in our field since forever. I bet every conference you've ever been with UX people, we moan about stuff, right? We're not respected, we're not included, we don't get the resourcing, people don't understand our craft, all the rest of it. Maybe this is the moment for a reset anyway. Maybe this has been a long time coming, but we should be just thinking of this as a moment to slightly reboot how we work. And then the other thing is that, all those productivity gains that we were talking about earlier on, my worry is not that we don't master the machines, it's that we don't master the productivity gains from the machines. It's that we don't see the benefits of those things accruing to people who are not those tech leaders who just want to, kind of see efficiency gains from the introduction of AI technology. Maybe we can embrace the idea of extending our skill set and move up the value chain. Maybe this could be liberating for us, actually, rather than something that just sees those efficiency gains go elsewhere. So I want to talk now a little bit about where things are going. And as I said, I don't have a crystal ball, none of us do. But I think we can start to imagine what some of these evolutionary pathways might be for UX research, and why we might want to go to a different place. So I want to, first of all, introduce the idea of vignettes. I have here 10 vignettes. These are the outputs of the conversations that I've been having with all of those people that I mentioned, where we just talked about, where do you see practice evolving? These are not exhaustive. I could have done 15 or 20 or whatever, but it just felt like, 10's a nice round number and it fits on the slide. There may also be an 11th one that actually, when you're thinking about your evolutionary pathway as a career, that's the thing that you're thinking about. That is absolutely in the spirit of this exercise, if that's how you see this. If you want to see the longer descriptions of these, by the way, that QR code there will give you that. So I'm just going to kind of touch on these, on 3 of them to highlight them, because I think then it will give you a flavor of the rest. But the idea is that these are things which, over time, will probably end up being complementary to the work that we currently do, which is defined by primary research. And that primary research will always be important. We will always be doing it, or somebody will always be doing it. But it's about how can we extend our skill set? How can we grow? How can we become more general? How can we lean into our breadth? So the first thing that I wanted to highlight was the idea of domain specialism. I think actually researchers have often made a mistake of thinking that because they are able to learn fast about anything, they should. Whereas actually I think there's an argument that going deep on a particular topic is the way to ultimately be successful in the future. And that might mean that you go beyond the bounds of what's considered acceptable practice for being a researcher now. It might mean that you become a decision maker and that you are accountable for the quality of your decisions, not just making recommendations to other people who make decisions. In the ad industry, they have a role called the ad planner, who's a kind of strategist who does research and makes decisions. I don't know why we don't have that in other places. It's a really interesting role. So it goes beyond being a researcher. You're an analyst, you're a strategist, you're potentially even a decision maker. Knowledge managers, this is the idea that we're moving away from the core value or the core thing that we do being primary research. And instead, we're thinking of our job as being to help people know things that they need to know. So we're kind of agnostic to where the things come from. We just need to change people's minds, which in turn is a vector of change for decisions about products or about users or whatever it might be. And then the final thing, and this is the one that's really close to my heart. So if you know me, you know that community is something that's really important to me. What if we lent into the idea that we are weaving community as researchers? It's often the emotional labor of UX research anyway. We're often the people who bring harmony and make sure that people are talking to each other and so forth. What if we just made that an area of practice rather than just something we did on the side because we felt it was important but didn't get paid for it? Yeah, as I say, this is important to me. I will mention at the end the project that I'm involved in here, but I'm just going to keep going for now. I also just want to say, these vignettes, they're not science fiction. I didn't kind of just imagine these. These are actually things that people are doing already, including some of the folks on this slide here. So when I think of these vignettes, I can picture in my mind somebody who is literally already doing the thing that I'm describing there. And this talk is an invitation for all of you to do the same, to do the thing that you think isn't part of your job, but maybe should be, and just see where it takes you. Because people are doing that already. So the final thing really is just to take some concrete steps to get to where we're going. And just because it's before lunch and we're probably all thinking about lunchtime, I'm just going to get you to do something here for a minute, right? Turn to the person next to you. All the better if it's somebody that you didn't come with. And I just want you to speak for a moment about which of the 10 vignettes, if any, speak to you. Or, perhaps it's none of them, and it's about your future, hopeful future for your role evolution, if you do a different role. And then what's the first step you could take towards it? I'm going to be really strict with time. I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to do this. And here are the vignettes, just in case you've forgotten. Speak to your neighbour. I said I was going to be ruthless with time, and it's the truth. But the good news is that you have the beginnings of a wonderful lunchtime conversation to get going with very shortly. We're nearly done now. Here's what I want you to hear right at the end here. You do not need permission to get started. You don't need your manager to create this role for you. That's probably not going to happen, right? You don't need your company to announce that there's going to be a strategic pivot and now everyone is going to do the thing that you want to be doing instead. And you certainly shouldn't wait for our field to figure itself out first. It's going to take a while, right, before we get out of this moment. Each of those vignettes started with somebody saying, I am a researcher, but there's this other thing that I'm interested in, and what would happen if I just tried it? And then over time, it showed the value and the role kind of grew around it. 10 years ago, there was no such thing as research ops. And today, you see research ops as a job, it's a career, etc. This is how these things happen. It's messy, it's incremental, it doesn't go right all the time, but I would really encourage you to kind of see this as not just a moment of change, but a moment of experimentation, a moment of leaning into breadth and seeing where that takes you. You have those skills. You have the skills that the report I shared shows are the most demand in 2030, with or without AI. You have an ability to understand people and to learn. And really the challenge, I think, for us now is not are we smart enough or are we kind of engaged or empathetic enough? It's as the world around us is changing, what do we want to happen? And are we ready to adapt to make it happen? And so I just want you to leave you with this. Like Alexi said, if you want to make change happen, the way to do it isn't to wait till next year, 2026, or when things calm down. Things never calm down, you know that. Do it next week, yeah? Do it on Monday, or Tuesday. After what Alexi said, do Alexi's thing on Monday. Do this on Tuesday. I just invite you to reject doom, really, to reject that idea that we're powerless in all of this and choose agency, because ultimately, if I want you to take one thing from this, it's that hope is a state of being active. Just one final thing. I mentioned about communities. So the project that I'm involved in, this is my hopeful future, is a thing called Together by Design. And if you believe that As designers, researchers, and people who work in this field, we should be doing more to create community, just as Danny and team have been doing with UX Brighton for so many years. This is our thing, right? So if you're interested in that, find me in the break and we can talk about it then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for having me and enjoy your lunch.